When I give these talks since 2013, I've been asked many different things about what's happening with journalism, about what's happening with government, what's happening with the internet, what's happening with technology. And the funny thing is, I think they're actually all centralized around similar factors. And most of you are familiar with them, right? Anybody who is into technology and is not simply a developer, right, but is also a user, anyone who's interested in privacy, anybody who's working with, online financial technology, who's thinking about, cryptocurrencies, or could just be Bitcoin or competitors to it, is seeing that increasingly there's all of these threads connecting to one another, and it's not a single thing. But rather we have an entire ecosystem that is decaying, right? Because it's actively under threat. In the earlier half of this century, or this last century, scientists and engineers were committing their lives to the pursuit of a new science, nuclear physics. And it was an incredibly passionate work. Publications went all over the world in every language. And it just energized an entire generation with the possibilities of free, nearly unlimited clean energy, advances in medical technology, advances in transportation. It was obvious how these new advances could be applied for the betterment of everyone. But it was also not long until the work of that cohort began to be applied to private needs. And this is interesting because most famously we're talking about nuclear weapons. And people don't think about that as private needs. People think about what the government does as the public good. But what's good for the state is very different than what's good for the people in many cases. And I think what we are seeing today is the work of our greatest minds of the last 50 years, now increasingly their work being indentured to the service of the private good. Now, this isn't just the state. This is, of course, the corporate state that we see, the Facebooks, the Googles, that are haunching on our common backbone, and they're trying to insert themselves into every human transaction. And these aren't merely trade transactions. These are communications transactions. And this is how we see the same thing that happened in the last century beginning to repeat again. A science that was developed in pursuit of the ideal of the common good being captured and distorted for the private benefit of certain groups, right? This can be a private elite corporate segment, or of course the national elite. Now, this is the reason that I say what we're living through today is the atomic moment of computer science. This is where we really have to look at what our work has done. And I don't mean your work personally, because a lot of you guys in the room, free software guys, you tend to be on the better side of a lot of these conflicts. But we all have to realize that everything that we do isn't enough. When I was sitting in 2013, and I saw what my government was doing behind closed doors, without consent of the governed in the United States, without the knowledge or consent of anyone in the world, flagrant violations both of U.S. law, constitutional rights, and more importantly, human rights around the world, I really wanted to tell somebody about it because I thought it was wrong. It took me a very, very long time to decide to come forward and tell people about it, even though I was increasingly certain that this was something that was in many cases contrary to what the government can even be permitted to do if they pass a law. But I knew that if I did, there were going to be consequences for me. It was going to be difficult for me personally. I didn't know quite how difficult, but I did have an idea. And it is this kind of natural pressure, the incentives and disincentives to a given move that a person can take in our lives, in our communities, in our societies, that I think all of us who work with systems understand very well, because this is how systems work. This is how systems are regulated. And as it stands today, all of the pre-existing laws and all of the loopholes that governments use to violate the spirit of the law, even if not the letter of the law, or more importantly, directly, just to violate our rights or the dignity of a given person, these are all achieved by exploiting their deep understanding of where the incentives are and the disincentives are. Primarily, they can break the law without punishment because they're the ones who apply the law. So what does it mean when the greatest safeguard of human rights that we've ever had in history, the law, begins to fail? I know some people who have thought about this a lot more deeply have been talking about it at the conference. But I think this is where we see a lot of excitement coming from technology recently, and particularly people who are working on these new decentralized sort of ledger-based type applications, is this idea that maybe when the law fails us, our technology can catch us. The problem, of course, is that technology has been catching us, general members of the public, people who don't know a fraction of what some of the people in the room know, and harming them quite significantly. So what do we do, and what are the actual problems? I think it's this identification of the problem that really helps us. Now, I think we're moving quite far along here, but the thing that keeps me up at night, the thing that I've been thinking about for years, the reason that I wrote a book about this that actually comes out in like a month, is that when I was a child, and I was in high school, even before high school, because of, I think you guys know the personality type, you probably struggled the same way. You have someone in authority who's telling you what to do. They don't explain why, you don't understand the system, and yet the system is applied to you. You have no power within the context of the system. You are not allowed to change the rules. You're not even allowed to petition to change the rules. That's simply the way things are. And someone says, do this, and you ask why, and they say, because I said so. This is the way a lot of power relationships work today, whether it's in the United States, where our electoral system is gerrymandered so much that we can't change power even if we campaign, to the operations of internet giants, where you see everybody complaining, you see everybody trying to boycott, you see everybody pressuring them and saying bad things about them. But they only change their policies at the very smallest edges, if at all. And the reason I think they feel so comfortable, all of these types of authorities throughout history, is they have a mastery of our fear of what happens if we break the rules, what happens if we try to change the way the system works. And when I was young, the way this worked was if you cut up in class, if you got out of line, they'd say, in of course a very concerned manner, for you, because it's you they're always worried about, not them, not their convenience, but you. You need to think about your future. You need to think about what it's going to look like if everybody else is following the rules and you're the only one breaking them. If you get out of line, if you get a bad grade, if you get a detention, if you do whatever, if you talk back, if you question everything all the time, this will go down on your permanent record. And then it will follow you to high school, and then it will follow you to college, and then it will follow you to workplace, and then it'll follow you through the rest of your interactions with power. And you know, as a kid, when you don't know anything about anything, that's actually terrifying. And over time, bit by bit, as you do more and more, the threat begins to lose its power, because you realize that there actually isn't a permanent record. Nobody cares what you did in elementary school. Nobody cares what you did in middle school. Nobody cared about high school or college, or honestly, nobody really cares about what you do in your workplace, besides your employer and then your next employer. But at best, the records have never been permanent. They've never been perfect. Until now. And this is the problem of the world we live in. The younger you are in this room, relative to the person next to you, the more of your life is known and recorded by people you have no influence over. And these records, at least under the laws in the United States, which have been unfortunately exported around the world into a kind of status quo, says that you don't own records about your private life. These companies that created them, they're their records, not you, even if they're entirely and exclusively about you.